Robert Fulford is a Toronto author, journalist, broadcaster and editor. He writes a weekly column for the National Post and is a frequent contributor to Toronto Life, Canadian Art and CBC Radio and Television. His books include Best Seat in the House, Memoirs of a Lucky Man, Accidental City, The Transformation of Toronto and Toronto Discovered. We met recently at his home in Toronto to talk both about his distinguished career as a critic and evaluative criticism in the Canadian canon.
When I first emailed you, I suggested evaluative criticism.
Yeah.
I know that's been a flogged horse.
I think so, yeah.
And yet here, looking at the literary, critical, massive work in Canadian history, one thing that really does strike me is that there is such a lack of evaluative criticism in the country, and there have been a variety of different reasons put forward as to why, but Northrop Frye being central to that question.
That's right.
Still, I've just written a piece calling for someone to write, how Somerset Maugham did his 10 greatest novels.
That's right.
I think we need more of that.
I like that kind of thing too. I admire it because it gives a structure to what goes on. Then you can be against that guy.
And you can try and come up with a better argument, and if you can't, well...
And dislodge this guy. Disprove one of his guys is no good, or whatever. Andrew Sarris in film criticism, he wrote a whole book called The American Cinema. And the whole book was really long lists of people you had to take seriously. Clement Greenberg was my favorite art critic because, first of all, he had a very, very reasoned approach to painting, but he felt he knew exactly what was the mainstream. He said, this is the mainstream. If you don't want to swim in it, it's okay. Just don't bother me. These are the mainstream. And it was Cubism, and it was abstract expressionism, and a few other things. And then there was a post-painterly abstraction and so on. He had it all listed, all worked out. And if there was a period of maybe 10 years, a lot of people just followed him and took him seriously.
Because of his confidence? Because
of his confidence, yes, exactly. Serene confidence, But then after a while, people began chipping away on him. Still, it did a great deal for art criticism, for art discussion, and so on. I agree with that entirely.
It just strikes me as so strange, the question of who we are.
Yeah.
If someone confidently came forward and said, these are the great works, this is the Canadian canon, and here's why, in a significant way, then, as you said, that stands as a position that can then be argued with.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's how a canon is built, but I don't even think there's a Canadian canon, really.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of talk about it anyway. There's a lot of people who say this should be in it, this should be out of it, and so on. But the thing to me, I'm a journalist. I was a journalist when I was 16 years old, and I'm a journalist now that I'm 77 years old. I've been above all the journalists, and I want to tell you what's important. I don't want to tell you this is better than that. I don't want to tell you forget this, leave that out. I don't want to tell that. As I say, I admire it when people, Sarris or Greenberg does it, because it gives a structure to things. My main interest has been to say, this is interesting. You've got to know about this. When Leonard Cohen wrote Beautiful Losers, I hated that book. And I wrote 3 columns about it over the next 2 weeks, discussing it. I didn't say I liked it. I didn't say I hated it. I did hate it. I think I did hate it in retrospect. But I wrote 3 columns over the next 2 weeks. And when I was talking to Leonard, he said, well, whatever you think of my book, you're certainly doing me a lot of good, because I was saying this is important. You have to know about this. Yeah. Pay attention.
And that's one of the key roles of a critic.
It's absolutely central. Absolutely central. Keep bringing back the things that are central. Bring them back to the focus. Find the center of your subject and keep focusing on it. And the other things fall away.
Just the mere fact that you're paying attention to it tells people
that's important.
That you think it has value.
Yeah, and it should be discussed, certainly. You don't have to say this is the greatest ever.
I do think, though, that if you talk about a great novel, there are criteria you personally have developed to determine why that is worth talking about.
I think many times, though, a great novel or a great play establishes a new set of rules. And you can no longer say, well, Stendhal did it this way, I mean, in many cases, great novelists write books, construct whole careers they never intended to. Even they didn't know what the rules were. Philip Roth is a classic case. Well, he's the best American novelist of today, I think. He said at some point about 10 or 15 years ago, I had no idea I was a Jewish novelist. And if you look at the first book is very Jewish. And the next 2 books are not at all Jewish, or hardly at all.
Masturbation, that's 4 or 5
later.
Yeah, okay.
4 or 5 books later, anyway. Goodbye Columbus is very much a Jewish community, but then there's when she was good and doesn't seem to have any Jewish qualities. And he imagined he was just part of, he was not going to be no more Jewish than Henry James was, Presbyterian or whatever the hell he was. But he's discovered, I'm constantly brought back to this subject, which I can't leave alone. It doesn't leave me alone. I don't leave it alone. So all I'm saying is that even he could not have told you the proper, when he set out to work, he had no idea what standards should be applied to Philip Roth. If he couldn't do it, I know he couldn't. If he couldn't do it, then it's very hard for most of us, for someone who doesn't write the books but writes about them. It's hard for them.
Yes, but we've got a limited time on Earth.
Yeah, that's true.
And we don't want to waste it.
So what we want is writing about books. I want to tell you what's important, what will have meaning in your life, and also what will please you.
To do that, you basically have to tell me what pleases you.
Yeah, that's right.
And so what does please you?
Well, comedy, strong sense of comedy. That's very important to me. A strong sense of rootedness. At the beginning, I could have told Roth, you have to be somewhere. I might have told him that. Of course, he wouldn't listen anyway, but he was intending not to listen. The one thing I would have said for sure was your novels have to take place within a certain sphere, not necessarily geographic sphere, but mental sphere. There has to be a shape within which you can operate. You can't have the universe. You can't have the world. You can only have this set of ideals, a geographic place, perhaps, a religious place, perhaps.
Something that the reader can...
Well, no, it's something that you and yourself can develop and can move on from one to... Every book does not have to be written from a tabula rasa point of view. You go on and on.
It's an evolution.
And this applies to Conrad as much as it applies to Henry James, as it applies to Dickens, or applies as much today to Dave Akers or something like that as it did to Mark Twain. There's a sensibility. You only got one. Your sensibility is formed in a certain period, in a certain place, by certain people. It's only going to happen to you once. You can only be on a lesson once.
It's almost like finding out what your passion is. Once you've found it and you're comfortable with it, it's you, and that is transmitted to the reader then.
That's
that
right.
Genuine.
And this is the classic case with Richler. He wrote 3 books, and then he wrote Denny Kravitz. And he knew it by the time he was through with that book. That was it. It had to be all about him. Now, I did a few other things, of course, a number of things, but the central point was he had a locale. He had a
small,
very small,
yeah,
tiny, and he had to have a way of thinking, an intellectual perspective, a tone. He had to have a sense of, had to realize what he thought was funny on paper, and he had to keep doing that sometimes 15 or 20 times to write a chapter to make it come out, so the comedy just flows. He had to do all that.
It was his truth, in other words.
His kind of truth, his kind of comedy, which was another way, is his kind of truth. What you see as funny is often the most true.
It's funny. I've just come from talking to A.L. Kennedy, who's a stand-up comedian as well as an honored novelist.
Yeah.
And the fact that sadness and humor are wedded.
Yeah. When you look at Dickens, you realize at a certain point he found out what was funny. I mean, he had a very depressing start to his life, but then you realize what was funny, who was funny. And then Jane Austen, I always say she's the bitchiest writer in the world. She's actually a writer beloved by people who aren't really as nice as they like to appear, such as myself or many other people. I just read Persuasion the other day, and I was thinking, this is horrible, cruel, and hilarious. It's all about the nicest people in the world.
Well, it's deflating their egos and their surfaces, and so humor, sort of a genuine humor, is one of your criteria.
Yeah.
What else?
I think that I click into a book when I realize that something is at stake besides the quality of the book. Something moving behind it, something historical, cultural, moral, whatever. Something's behind it, and then I follow Trilling and Edmund Wilson, all sorts of writers who sort of educated me through their books. I'd say those are two important things. You want to ask what is at stake, and you want to ask where's the comedy. And of course, beyond that, it's all energy, style, and the ability to do it over and over again. Approach the same material again and again until it comes up right. I find that with Richler. He's one writer I've been with while he's been working on his books. And you realize there are times when he's looking at deep depression, And there were times when he was just floating around, And it all had to do with whether he cracked some kernel of the book. And Philip Roth is interesting because a lot of part of his complaint could have been done as stand-up comedy. Mm-hmm. He just stood up in a club and talked that way. Probably without many words changed, it would have worked. And in fact, one of his best friends, Theodore Solotaroff, said that Philip Roth was deeply influenced by Lenny Bruce. Because once Lenny Bruce said certain things, it was like a revelation. It was sort of like, can you say that? Can you say it? Once he said that, it was all right to. Not as if he was giving permission.
He started it. Something. It's like saying cocksucker on television.
Yeah,
shit, piss, fuck, whatever.
Yeah.
There's the initial shock value, and then it's not such a big deal anymore, I suppose.
That's right.
So you're suggesting what?
I was just saying that how he found his sense of humor. Later on, that particular comedy slipped away from Roth, and he got deeper into other subjects. But you see it every once in a while. He wheels it up again. It became the center of his books for a little while, and then it became part of his repertoire.
Yeah, there's some funny stuff about writers and how writers will rape and pillage their own families for
absolutely
all the best stuff. Yeah.
I think there are very few writers who don't do something like that. Good writers, solid writers.
So you'd say those are the
key things
you look for.
Mind you, I can be bowled over by something totally different. Humorless, straight ahead.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Madame Bovary. That's not a funny book. Brilliant book.
Oh yeah, not much comedy there, but it's one hell of a piece of work. Those are things that happen to appeal to me, are likely to appeal to me, but sometimes there are things in literature which don't contain any of those qualities, and yet seem very important to me.
We've talked about bringing important books that will add meaning to the lives of the readers and enriching their lives, bringing attention to the books. What else? You as a critic, what have you tried to do over the last half century or more?
I started a daily books column in the Star in '59. So okay. What year is this?
There you go.
Jesus. Well, one thing I worried about a little bit, and then realized I couldn't worry about it, was this. How should I put it? Well, let me go around another way. I think critics, people writing about the arts in general, shouldn't worry about being accused of having a bee in their bonnet, being an obsessive, or writing too much on one subject. I think I was a little bit at the beginning. I need to be a little more general in these. I need to be a little broader in my thinking.
This is what you felt you had to be?
That's what I was thinking. I was writing a daily column in the Star. It was only a daily column on books in Canada.
Putting that in perspective, we'll get maybe 3 or 4 columns a week if we're lucky. Now you were doing one every single day, specifically focusing.
Not a new book every day. Actually, I was art columnist of the Star too. So Thursday afternoon. Now this is another era, but on Thursday afternoon you could, in 4 hours, you could see all the shows that had opened in Toronto. Uh-huh. Today, of course, it'd take you a whole week and you wouldn't see them all. However, my point is, let's say you stuck to very short books. You couldn't do 5 books a week. Often one of the columns would be strictly an interview. Another column would be news and notes from all over or whatever.
A roundup kind of.
Yeah. Sometimes it would be the appearance of in paperback of a book that had come out 6 years ago when I read it first. And every week certainly would be one very big book. A Sinclair Lewis biography, a big thick biography, and then probably a couple of short novels or whatever.
You felt that you had to sort of spread it around?
I think that I was trying to be more like a book section, as if I was writing a whole section. Mm. And after a while, I began to realize that there are things that really, really interest me.
Those are the things you probably wrote the best about.
Yeah, absolutely. And when they failed, then the failure of that book was important. When they succeeded, the success of that book was important. By implication, I was saying, this is a rather important thing we're doing here. Brian Moore was one of the most wonderful novelists I ever read. I read all his books. I read several of them more than once, and I talked about him, and I've interviewed him. I gave the speech on him when he was honored by the Harbourfront 10 and 12 years ago. So I've been deeply involved in him, but I have been able to say, when I said this is his best book, or this is the book in which he sums everything up. I was able to write it with some passion.
And some knowledge, obviously, too.
Obviously, yeah. And when he failed, or when I didn't see the point of it, or when I had to admit that it was not within his range, he had come up with an idea, a fantasy, for example. He wasn't very good on fantasy.
He's going to try it, I suppose, just experiment.
Yeah.
So the point you're making then is that you wish you had allowed yourself to focus more on the things that you were passionate about, as opposed to trying to be something to everyone.
Yeah, but I got on this pretty quickly, though. It was just in the early stages. I was very, very interested in American writing. Several people said to me, there are books written in countries other than the United States, things like that.
Like Canada.
Yeah. Well, I was very interested in that, by all means, but I had so few books by comparison. I reviewed almost every book in English in Canada.
It's something to be able to say that. I don't know if that's a reflection of the poverty of the talent.
It wasn't a poverty of talent as so much as, it was just an undeveloped literary community. There was a whole group of people trying to make a literary community in this country, Weaver, all the people in the Tamarack, but also Woodcock and a lot of people. Oh my God. Ross, who edited the New Canadian Library. Those people were trying to formulate a structure, a way of collecting the books of Canada, encouraging that more books be written. And McClellan, by the way, had a lot to do with that. He was ready to go to really throw his energy into a book that he thought was important. Sometimes he didn't even think it was important. He just thought it was likely to be important when the guy wrote 3 more books. McClellan said, I don't publish books, I publish authors. And I think that was a pretty sensible point of view for him.
From a business standpoint, perhaps, but there's the controversy between that whole thing about biography and should it have any impact on reading the work
itself.
itself.
Once you're going to read the work, but he had to produce the work for you to decide that kind of thing. That kind of thing is irrelevant if you haven't got the books. And if you reach the point where you realize the purity of the book is what matters most, the pure value of the book itself matters, that's okay. There are 12 books there. You could discard 10 of them and find the 2 masterpieces, but McClellan had to get them in print.
He had to make enough money to keep doing that.
Yeah, and all he had to start with just pages of typed manuscript and somehow turn that into something that was first of all printed, edited and printed, secondly distributed, and thirdly considered, thought about, noticed.
Sold and read.
Read and argued over. He did that beautifully with a dozen novelists, I suppose, but certainly Leonard Cohen, certainly Richler, certainly Moore, and absolutely Margaret Lawrence. He was just behind her every inch, pounding away. When are you having it? When are you giving me? I mean, she was giving up all the time. And he was saying, when are you giving me the novel you promised? And he would write a 10 hectare and praising letters for every book that she...
Again, getting back to your role, it's akin to what he was doing. He was searching for talent, and he was presenting it to the population. Once he'd done that, then did you see it as your job to tell the people why they should be reading it?
Well, yes. First of all, find it is really interesting, or has he killed himself again, as he certainly did? Mm-hmm. Is there something there? That was the first thing you have to say to if you're a critic.
Do you withhold saying that there isn't something there, or do you say there isn't something there?
Oh, I think you should be willing to say there's not much there. Mind you, you're very, very biased in favor of there being something there. You want something there because you want to write about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Not because you want to improve Canadian literature, because you want to write about it. At a certain point, as any journalist, you become very selfish after a while. You're selfish about what you're giving the readers. You're selfish about what you're spending your time on. You want to be doing something important. You want to be something central.
Because the mere fact that you are writing about something that's important means that in 50 years, your writing about that important thing will also be important.
I don't really think of this term. I'm really thinking of this year. I'm thinking of whether people are going to find something to read that's valuable, whether you can recommend things to people. But above all, the important thing that matters is not your judgment, in my opinion, not your final judgment. It's what you have to say about it. Of course, of every book review, you've got to say...
pick it up or don't pick it up.
Yeah, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But that's the least important thing. I mean, probably 100 people in the university professors living within a mile of where we are right now could tell you that in a second. But as a journalist and a critic, you've got to say, why is it interesting? Where does it come from? What does it represent? What does it connect to? What does it say about this era we're living in? What does it speak to? And what is at stake? All of those things are much more important than whether I personally had a good time reading this book.
Yeah.
This is...
Okay, so let's go to what is at stake. What do you mean by that?
Well, does it say something that matters about its subject?
Dr. Johnson had something to say about, is the book useful to me specifically? Is it going to change my life? Is that what you mean by what's at stake?
No, I mean what I mean is the theme of the book such that it reverberates beyond this one incident. There's a little incident in the book. The whole book is maybe an incident. But what is at stake in the implications, in the storyline, in the thematic material, in the social description, all these things? In what way does it work? In what way does the book matter? Will it matter to the reader? Will it matter to 100 readers or 100,000 or a million or whatever? That kind of thing. Will it matter?
Will it matter, again, though, in terms of how they live their life?
Or how they see the world, or how they understand.
It might change the way they see the world, or interact with their wife, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
That means it matters to them.
Yeah.
As it'll affect their life.
That's right. I think, go back to Jane Austen. I think you cannot read right through her and not be affected in the way you think of money, relatives,
class,
and that horrible business of wanting to be important or wanting to be respected. The guy who, in Persuasion, the book opens with the guy who there's only one book he ever reads. It's a book on the baronets. He reads it always because he's in it, and he wants to know. It comes out every 3 years or something. Where all the other baronets of England, what's happened to them?
Yeah.
Some have died. Some who have succeeded them. This is what interests him because it's more vital than any other thing you can read a book about. So why should he be reading other books? That's all implied in about one page,
Right.
But that begins the book, and you realize you're dealing with an incredibly vicious person who could not even dream of knowing he was vicious.
And a class of people that are quite like that.
Well, anyway, a class of people who attempt to be like that, and some of them are in fact go so far down the line they become monsters, like this guy is, and other people are just, perhaps Jane Austen herself, have an ironic view of all this, can see it, put it in perspective.
This is what J.M. Coetzee does with his fiction. He uses his fiction as criticism of life, but also of various literary devices.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
So he'll attack biography, for example, in his latest novel.
Yeah.
So are you suggesting then that novels that critique society or
when I say what's at stake,
economics?
When I say what's at stake, I don't mean it has to be something part of a list of social questions I've brought up. An ideal novel might make me think about a social question I've never heard of before.
Without that interfering with the narrative, I would assume.
Yeah. The question is, what is at stake in that book? Does it matter? That's something you have to bear in mind. It's not the only thing. There are many other things you have to bear in mind. When you think of Margaret Lawrence's books, you're dealing there with things that are so deeply rooted in the human personality. She deals with parents and children, husbands and wives, and friends and enemies, and all those things. And her work is never without a thrusting moral perspective, which is what was at stake in that book. And I think the same would be true of Alice Munro. On the other hand, Mavis Gallant is a brilliant writer, and half the time you don't know what's at stake. She's a great writer. She's got style beyond style. And there are times when you think, what was at stake there? Why was she telling me all that? And of course, you may have trouble figuring it out, but maybe she's keeping it a secret sometimes. But with Alice Munro, it's pretty clear. With Mavis Gallant, that's another
ambiguity.
Yeah, there's much more ambiguity. And she's an ambiguous writer. She would not necessarily like it if I was able to say, like, this is what matters. That's another writer I've read that had this incredible good luck to be coterminous with or whatever.
Yes, yes.
I followed her when I was 12 or 13 years old, and she was a movie critic of the Montreal Herald.
And now she's in her mid-80s, right?
She's like 8 or 10 years older than I am. I remember that name on the top of the weekly movie reviews in the Montreal Herald, which was like a Sunday supplement. She did a lot of reporting for them, but she did this movie thing for a while. And somehow I was just learning about movies, and I was beginning of my teenage life. Anyway, I read her every week.
What about Pauline Kael?
That was quite a bit later. But then Mavis Gallant, 10 or 8 years, I didn't hear from her. For all I knew, she could have died. 7 or 8 years she was gone. I picked up the New Yorker, and that was the name at the end of it. Oh my God. And then the fact that I realized, oh, it must be somebody, same person, same name, could happen, a coincidence. But then I get into it. That was a story about Montreal. Guess it must be the same person. Anyway, I read every word she wrote from that.
But life may have gotten in the way. For 10 years, things may have happened.
Oh yes, sure.
T.S. Eliot once famously talked about the fact that the best critics are the ones that write the poetry, write the novels.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I don't think it's necessarily true. Certainly, he's got something in mind there, and it's a wonderful quality that he has, in that he is standing in the middle of a tradition and trying to describe that tradition. And he's the latest example of that tradition. And he looks back on beyond the Romantics and back to the era of John Donne, for example. He's trying, first of all, youth, he's trying to find his own place within that tradition. And having found it, he then knows why he wants to be in that tradition, and then he knows that takes him into reading John Donne or whoever it is. So he has that all through his life. And it's a wonderful kind of criticism. But there are many critics who have either not written poetry or fiction, or have written it.
For Edmund Wilson,
just
gave it one shot.
I'm just going to say Edmund Wilson is a classic case. He was a wonderful critic in about 4 or 5 different ways over in his life. A great journalist. He wasn't much as a fiction writer.
I'm thinking of James Wood too. He's written one novel as well.
I don't even like the sound of that. Even the people who like it, I don't. When they I haven't read it, but I've read 4 or 5 reviews in which they tell me how good it is, and it sounds bad to me. But anyway, but I love James Wood. I think he's wonderful. He's smart.
Yes. He uses metaphors better than most of the writers that he critiques, I think.
The last time I saw Paul Bellow, he was seeing James Wood the next day in Boston. He was in Toronto. And I said, would you tell him I hate him? I just... He understood why.
Talking of Wood, he mentioned not that long ago that it was much more difficult for him to write a negative review now because of the fact that he's in the same circles as those that he reviewed. Given the size of the pond in Canada, has that thwarted your honest appraisal of...
I hope not. On the other hand, it does require some, delicate... People obviously don't like you when you don't like the novel. It's like a personal attack sometimes when you say this novel is inadequate. I got an email 2 days ago from Paul Almond, who was a filmmaker in the 1960s, and he started off with praise, wonderful praise, for my piece about Douglas Campbell in the beginning of Stratford, which I wrote in the Post a couple of weeks ago. I hadn't heard from him since the 60s, or maybe the 70s. And he said, oh, Bob, you're the greatest obit writer in the world. There's a wonderful piece. That's terrific. And then the next paragraph was, I know you hate me. And actually, I think I wrote one piece negative.
In all those years.
So I wrote back and I said, I don't think I ever hated your work, but I may have been critical of Act of the Heart. That was the name of this famous movie he made. I said, I may have been critical of this, but I never felt that your work lacked integrity. Anyway, he wrote back again and said, well, how you could not like Act of the Heart, I don't know. When everyone must love it. Everyone should love it. In fact, you should see it again.
You won't let go.
In fact, nobody liked it. But anyway, the thing is that I was getting on for half a century since he...
Yes.
I was thinking of something about the Diviners. I was Margaret Lawrence's, I guess I was maybe her biggest fan as far as journalistic critics are concerned. And then the Diviners came along. Now, CBC asked me to interview her on the radio. I knew I was probably reading this book reading the book, and I reviewed her, and I interviewed her on the CBC. I didn't like the book. And I did not make my interview at all about the fact that I didn't like the book. In fact, I didn't say I didn't like the book. And I didn't want to say that because I wanted to get the best possible. I don't think when you do interviews you should be telling people that your book is not very good or whatever. You should try to get the best words you can out of Margaret Lawrence. That was my assignment. And we were only going to have 20 minutes on the air, and that was what I wanted. Where the hell did this come from? Why did she do this? That was what I wanted to do. 2 days after the interview appeared, my review of her book appeared. And she told someone at McClellan and Stewart she was very bitter with me. For what? Because I didn't say so when I interviewed her.
Oh, you weren't honest.
Well, it wasn't honest. An honest interview should have started off, I don't like this book at all, so why'd you write such crap? I'm not interested in doing that.
There's a certain amount of respectfulness that's there.
That's right. I wanted to bring her out.
Maybe that would have brought her out. Maybe she would have defended the book.
Maybe she did very well on that occasion. Anyway, my point is that kind of thing you run into all the time. And if Margaret Lawrence happens to be your best friend, if you've really become very close to her, it's going to be hard to deal with. So I don't have any novelists who are considered to be my best friend. Although I'm very close to some people who are maybe the best friend of certain people. That's okay. But my point is that you cannot pretend to like books you don't like.
Are you silent then?
No, for instance, I wrote negatively about Richler, about Moore, about, as I say, about Lawrence.
Positively and negatively, obviously.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It wouldn't matter if I was always writing about how bad they were.
Do you think there's been enough honest appraisal of
Well,
books?
I'll tell you, there is some amount of corruption deep in the heart of all critics, I think, somewhere. I just confessed a few minutes ago one of my biases, which is I want it to be good because I want to be able to tell people how good it is and tell them all the virtues of this book, which I have discovered, but they don't know about it yet.
To show them how smart you are.
Or no, just to make my review into something valuable and readable and something that will do the job. You know, I'm not interested in appearing smart. I'm interested in writing a good article. By implication, someone who writes a good article is smart, I guess, but I'm not trying to exhibit knowledge
You
for
want
its own sake.
You want to test yourself against the best metal that's there and come up to that challenge?
I want to write a good material. I want to write good articles, good columns, articles, whatever. That's what I want. And I have certain standards, and I try to live up to them. So that's why I say I confess that's a corruption of mine.
Corruption is your dedication to excellence? How's that?
The corruption is you're opening a book and very much hoping it will be good, because if it's really weak, the article won't matter much or won't
because there's not enough meat to engage with?
Particularly if the writer's not well known.
Yeah, you don't want to harm them.
Well, no, it's not that. I mean, you certainly don't want to harm them pointlessly, but the fact is, you can't pick up a book by an unknown writer and then spend 700 words telling the world that's of no value, because the world isn't going to hear of it anyway. So the last thing they want to hear about is another book of no value has appeared. And Robert Fulford says so in the paper.
I'm not going to buy it anyway.
I wasn't going to buy it. I wasn't even going to hear about it. So I wasn't even going to hear the...
Why is he wasting my time?
Why is he wasting my time? Okay. So my bias is towards a book that will lead to an interesting article. Engaging. Book doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be a masterpiece. It needs to have enough quality in it that you can write about it with admiration and take it seriously. That's a kind of a corruption in a way, because it means you're starting out perhaps eager, perhaps a little too eager sometimes, and that can lead you into kidding yourself about a book. I suppose it could. But there is another corruption, which is some people think they will make themselves more accommodating to their friends if they praise their books or whatever, make themselves more engaging, make themselves more likable or lovable,
popular, yeah.
Whatever. That's the corruption. And people often criticize the book pages for being full of puffery. And sometimes that is justification. I would say that's not by any means the worst sin of our newspaper critics or our literary critics.
What's the worst sin?
Not saying anything interesting.
Being boring.
That is the great crime.
Not just of critics, but of all writers.
Yeah. Of course, I care more about books than about most matters, so I don't care if the guy writes on hockey games, it's boring, but I care when I pick up the paper and there's a chunk of a book about an important critic, and he hasn't said anything interesting. That's far, far more important than a little corruption here or there. That's a failure.
And is it hard to write interestingly about a bad book? Harder than it is to write interestingly about a great book? Because I think some of the best stuff that I've written is because I'm annoyed that I've wasted my time reading this book, and so I want to punish them.
You may be punishing somebody who isn't going to exist without your... I mean, I don't know. To me, the great sin of much journalism and much criticism is a lack of engagement by the writer with the subject, and a lack of a kind of lackadaisical view of things that makes all books sound a little vaguely alike.
Cookie cutter.
Yeah.
I'm speaking with Robert Fulford, renowned writer, broadcaster, critic, Canadian.
Renowned, lovely.
Renowned.
I love doyen. I was referred to in the Toronto Star as the doyen of Canadian print journalism. That's the word. Okay. The doyen.
Doyen, yeah.
Toronto Star, just the other day. Another honor.
Renowned. You're not a gadfly, though, and you're not a booster.
No, I hope not. But I'm not someone who is confident about his writing when he's doing it. I tried to express this once to someone who's doing a piece about me for a journalism review. I'm a guy who has to get up every morning and write something interesting, and I find it very hard.
But you've been doing it pretty well every day for 60 years.
There you are.
That says something about your tenacious will.
Yeah, there you are. I find it quite hard. In fact, it's a process in which I go through.
Exhausting hard, or?
No, but it's hard work, But there's a process that I go through sometimes, which is, first of all, you're writing something, and you think, this is not interesting. I'm not very interested. But nothing I write is going to be interesting. Nothing I write on this stupid subject is going to be interesting. And then, slowly, you work it some more, and then you say, and furthermore you say, it's only going to be 300 words anyway. These are very depressing things that critics say. I think some critics say to themselves, and then you keep at it. And then later on you say, oh my God, I'm 200 words over what I'm allowed, and I have to cut this back. And anyway, ideally you should be able to get up and say, I know how to do this kind of thing.
I've been doing it in my sleep for...
That's right.
Who said that doubt is the most important companion of a writer?
That's right. Well, doubt is... I've got plenty of that going at all times. I've always had plentiful supply of that.
Just in closing, has there been a collection of your... I know your website's got a... Please excuse my ignorance, but...
Well, I did one book. It's called Crisis at the Victory Burlesque, which came out in the 60s.
Long time ago, yeah.
Yeah, and then there's another one in the 70s of movie reviews. But then this book here, Accidental City, was in part a collection of articles in Toronto Life magazine. So there have been a number of collections, but I've turned down, not that the publishers are banging on the door, but a few times I've turned down the possibility of doing another book because they don't sell many copies, and it's not much fun.
Hard on the ego, or?
Well, it's just painful.
Especially seeing them in the remainder bin, I suppose.
Yeah, well, the remainder bin is some of the best books are in the remainder bins, but no, it's not. That's not depressing. What's depressing is statements come from the publisher saying, "You still owe us on your book that we gave you an advance on 15 years ago."
It's coming home to roost. Final question, and that is, well, it's a two-parter. You've mentioned Edmund Wilson and James Wood. Any other critics that you might recommend to the listeners? Number one, perhaps a brief explanation of why, and anything that any of those critics have said that may have directed your efforts over the years.
Lionel Trilling was someone who mattered a great deal to me, and I think still does. I still read him from time to time. He has a few followers left who keep bringing out his books. Leon Wieseltier edited a book called The Moral Obligation to the Intelligent. And that was Weasel Tears' collection of thrilling articles that appeared a few years ago. He was a great critic, thrilling. And now we know from his journals that he had more doubt than any 16 other people you know. However, that's another problem. He wrote wonderful, wonderful, solid material with a base of seriousness. He, above all, I think probably told me that if something isn't at stake in his book, then it's not a book you need to take seriously. I think he certainly conveyed that to me. I never knew him. I once spent an afternoon with him, but otherwise I knew him only as someone I read and talked about endlessly. He's vanished from universities now. It's hard to believe it, but he was the king of Columbia. And today there might be some book list in Columbia that carries his name now. But the era of theory has wiped out all those people. As for Edmund Wilson, he would never be taken seriously. I don't think you could get away with even quoting him in a paper in a graduate school and in a university. These people are gone for now, or maybe forever.
Well, let's hope not.
Another guy is the prince of newspaper critics, A.J. Liebling. Seems like every 6 months someone does a Liebling book. Yeah. And his whole life he never had one book sell properly, never made money. I have all his first editions, and I don't think there's one book among them you could say, oh yeah, that's the one that made the money. It never happened after his life either. He died 25 years ago.
He's someone you recommend?
I think so. He doesn't write fiction. It's all journalism.
Criticism or journalism?
It's journalism deeply infused with his personality, whether he writes about war, press, boxing, or characters. He had several characters he wrote about. One man in particular was a kind of tout whom he followed, wrote about all the time. Liebling was a great journalist. I remember there's a woman who said to me, I would never watch a boxing match for money. I would not accept a fee to watch a boxing match. But on the other hand, I would never dream of not reading Liebling's books about boxing or his articles about boxing. Mm-hmm. That's how good he was. He's also said once, I can write faster than anyone who can write better, and I can write better than anyone who can write faster. He was a very funny guy.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts about the critic and for getting up every day for the last 50 years and beating the doubt.
It's 100 now.
Thanks again.
Thank you.